Several years ago, I came across a book by the title Famous Last Words. And it's actually, in many ways, a fascinating book. Within the book are dozens of stories of people and their last words. Before they died, the final words that they spoke. So really some meaningful and powerful stories. But one of my favorites, and I don't know what this says about me, is one that I don't want to call it a funny story, but it is at least a tragically humorous story of a famous last word that goes back to the Civil War. There was a Union general during the Civil War at the Battle of Spotsylvania in 1864. And there was some sniper fire coming from the Confederates, and some of his men said to get down, get down. And these were his very famous last words. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. And boom, shot right underneath his left eye, kills him instantly. Famous last words. I think that you would probably agree with me when I say that last words many times have significance and they are important to us. The last page of a book, the last words of a meaningful letter or a letter you receive from a meaningful person, Last words tend to be pretty important. And just to kind of emphasize how important they are, I wonder if any of you have ever been in an argument with your spouse or a close friend. Let's say it is your spouse and you were to say, these last words, honey, I want you to have the last word. And I think most of us understand intuitively that we would never say that in an argument because we want the last word. And we want the last word because last words are important to us. Today, I want to share with you, and really the focal point of this message are some of the last words of Jesus. Jesus, he had been crucified. He had risen from the dead. For 40 days, he ministered to his disciples in a variety of different ways. And now he's gathered together with them for the final time before he would ascend into heaven. And he has his last words to them. It's found in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 28. He'll say, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And then he says these words, go and make disciples of all nations. He's saying to his disciples, I want you to go and find people, lead them into a relationship with me. And where is the target group? They are in the nations, all nations. And this word nations is a word that really in English, the way we think of it, we think of geopolitical boundaries. But he's really not talking about geopolitical boundaries like France, a nation like France or Germany or Morocco or even the United States of America. But what this word nations means, the Greek word is ethne. And when you hear it, you can hear the English word ethnic, We get our English word ethnic from this. So what Jesus is saying is, I want you to go and make disciples from the people in all ethnic groups, all culture groups, all the different varieties of people groups around the world. And really when we're talking about these people groups, we're talking about people who share an ethnic identity that is built around a common history, maybe a common language, a common set of beliefs, and it ties them together as a people. Okay? Now, kind of put a bookmark right there for a second. I want you to think about, I want you to move from nations to countries. Okay? So, in the world in which we live today, there are 195 different geopolitical countries, political countries or nations in the world. Okay? Now, talking of nations or distinct, very different people groups, there are people who study this say over 16,000 different people groups, ethnic groups, cultural groups. And the way you kind of understand this, or maybe the way that I can help you understand the distinction between a country like Pakistan and its people groups. Pakistan is a nation in the Middle East, one geopolitical nation, but within the borders of this small country are over 400 distinct people groups. Many of them have different languages, different customs and cultures. They live within this small region, but they are distinctly different. China, as big as it is, one nation, 56 distinct people groups within that nation. Think of the United States of America. One nation, one country, there are 6 major people groups. For example, Hispanic or American Indian or African American or Caucasian. Those are some of the major distinct groups. The United States is a melting pot. 1,500 different culture groups within this country of ours. Okay? So, let's go back to this slide that talks about 16,000 plus different or distinct people groups. And this next slide I'm going to show you is really important where I'm going today. Jesus tells us to go and make disciples of all nations, all distinct people groups. People who study this have discovered that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 people groups that are classified as unreached with the Christian faith. And what they mean by that is less than 2% of the population of that people group are Christians, and there is no viable church in their language. So if you lived in one of these unreached areas, and you wake up on Sunday morning and you want to go to a church in your own mother tongue, there is no church for you to go to. Okay? So these are unreached people groups. I've read that actually there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 billion people who fall into this category. There's 8.2 billion people in the world, and 3 billion of them, are unreached. Now, I'm going to drill down just a little bit deeper. There are UPGs, unreached people groups, but people who study this kind of thing says there's also unengaged, unreached people groups, and that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 of those. So 7,000 UPGs. Of those 7,000, 3,000 are unengaged, unreached people groups. And what that means is there are no churches in those ethnic areas, no Christians, no missionaries, and nobody is trying to reach them. Maybe to give you a more of a visual idea of what we're talking about, most of the people that are UPGs, UUPGs, unengaged, unreached people groups, live in this part of the world. They call it the 1040 window. 10 degrees south latitude to 40 degrees north latitude. We're talking about North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Most of the people, high percentage, some say as much as 95% of the unengaged, unreached peoples of the world live in this part of the world. I saw somebody the other day that described them as thumb people, and this is an acronym. And what it means is they're tribal, Hindu, unreligious, Muslim, and Buddhist. That's the religious or non-religious background. The unreligious, most of those are in China. North Africa has some tribals and it has some Muslims. The Middle East, mostly Muslim. And in Asia, you'll have Hindu and Buddhists. And here, what we're talking about, again, is from 3,000 to 7,000 different, distinct groupings of people that have not been reached, 2 to 3 billion people in total in these regions. These are people, and here's the thing it's important to understand. Many of them, in fact, most of them have never even really heard of Jesus. Let that sink in for a second. If they have heard of Jesus, they've heard a distorted version of Jesus that has been caricatured by their religious background, by people who don't want them to think Jesus is anybody that's special. So Jesus has been mutated, in their mind. This is pretty powerful. And I know some of you are maybe thinking, can there be that many people who've never heard of Jesus? What about the internet? You do know, don't you, that 35% of the world's population do not have access to the internet. That's 1/3 of 8.2 billion people do not have access to that. And same with television, maybe in some cases even be electricity. I mean, we're talking about people who live in a level of poverty that we just don't understand in this country. Okay? Now, look at this slide. Look at these numbers. Look at people who don't know about Jesus. And I want you to look at this next verse in the Bible that's found in in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24. Jesus is talking about the end of time. Okay? He said, Matthew 24:14, this gospel, the good news about Jesus, this gospel of the kingdom, Jesus is establishing a new kingdom here on earth. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. So Jesus, it's kind of like the Great Commission in Matthew 28. He says, the message of good news is going to go out to all the world. Now look at the next line in this verse. And then the end will come. I want you to ponder that for just a second. When this happens, then the end will come. Now, I'll admit, the interpretation of this verse is controversial, and there are differences of opinion about this. But one pretty clear understanding of this verse is what Jesus is saying. When he says end, he's talking about his second coming. The end of life here on earth, the second coming of Christ. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached to the whole world, throughout the whole world, to all nations, all ethnic groups, and then the end will come. Now, think about that in light of this, the unengaged, unreached people groups. No churches, no Christians, no missionaries, no one engaging them. Let me just go back to this verse. If that's the way, if this isn't a proper reading of this verse, that Jesus is not coming back until this is done, and if this is true, is Jesus coming back today? No. Is the second coming of Christ going to be tomorrow? No, because the job is not done. The task is still unfinished. The sad fact of so much of our world, in this country, we've had so many opportunities to hear the gospel. Some of you listening to this, you've heard the gospel hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of times. And you've grown cold to it. While this part of the world has hardly even had an opportunity. Many of them don't even know who Jesus is. And what I would say to you, this need, this picture is representative of a calling. Do you think God cares about these people? Do you think Jesus wants us to reach these people? I would say yes. For something has happened to us in this country. Somehow we've grown asleep at the wheel, asleep in the light. In fact, back in 1978, when I was 23 years old, a guy named Keith Green wrote a song in this album called No Compromise, that rattled my cage. It was a stomach punch to me, a wake-up call to me, to missions, and to the needs around the world. The song is entitled Asleep in the Light. And I want to show you this song. I'm not going to sing it for you, but I want to show you the words to this song. Do you see all the people sinking down? Don't you care? Are you going to let them drown? How can you be so numb not to care if they come? You close your eyes and pretend the job's done. Oh, bless me, Lord. That's all, that's all I ever hear. No one aches, no one hurts, no one even sheds one tear. But he cries, he weeps, he bleeds, and he cares for your needs. You just lay back and keep soaking it in. Oh, can't you see it's such a sin? Because he brings people to your door and you turn them away as you smile and say, God bless you, be at peace. And all heaven just weeps because Jesus came to your door and you left him out in the streets. Open up Open up and give yourself away. You see the need. You hear the cries. So how can you delay? God's calling and you're the one. But like Jonah, you run. He's told you to speak, but you keep holding it in. Oh, can't you see it's such sin? The world is sleeping in the dark, but the church just can't fight because it's asleep in the light. How can you be so dead when you've been so well fed? Jesus rose from the grave and you can't even get out of bed. Oh, Jesus rose from the dead. Come on. Get out of your bed. Now, we listen to a lot of music, and when we listen to music, we like to listen to the kind of music that just makes us feel good. Oh, that's so sweet, and it makes me feel so loved by Jesus. I tell you, when I heard that song, it didn't make me feel so sweet. Again, it was like a stomach punch. There was an attempt to awaken my heart to the needs of the world around me. And how, as a Christian, even in this country, we're so accustomed to the gospel. We're so accustomed to church that we've lost sight of the greater mission to which Jesus has called us. I think it's fascinating in the Old Testament, when God first spoke to Abraham, he said, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And then look at these last two lines, which represents the first calling to the Hebrew people. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. The mission of the Jewish people was to be God's ambassadors in this world. And you can see that what Jesus does in Matthew 28:19 is he just takes that commission that, in fact, 57 times in the Old Testament, God expresses his concern for the nations, for the peoples of the world. 57 times. And so Jesus picks up on that and says, I want you guys to go and make more disciples. Of whom? Of the nations, all the ethnic groups. And so he also says, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached. This is going to be your mission throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And I'm not coming back till you get that job done. And then I think it's also fascinating now to go to the end of the Bible, to the book of Revelation, chapter 7, verse 9, where the apostle John has this vision of heaven. Look what he sees in heaven. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could count. So great. Who is in this crowd? From every nation, all tribes and peoples and languages. Notice they're standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands. These are saved people. So what John reveals to us through this revelation is that when it's all said and done, the 16,000 plus will be reached. They'll be reached. So, today, what's our response to this great commission? What are we going to do? And I want to suggest 3 words: pray, give, and go. Pray, give, and go. Jesus himself said, look at the harvest. The field is white. It's ready to be harvested. Pray now to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his fields. Jesus tells us one of the things we should be praying for are more and more missionaries, more and more pastors, more and more people who will rise up with a sense of calling in their heart. God, use me. Here am I. Send me. I'm ready to go. And he wants us also to give. Paul writes to his understudy Timothy, he says, tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works, good deeds, and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. We need to pray for people. We need to pray for laborers, pray for missionaries and pastors, and we should be willing to support them, give. And for some of us, we need to be willing to go. Not everybody can probably go. Maybe not everybody should go. Not everybody's equipped and gifted to go. But we need more who will go. So today, I want you to think about your life. How are you responding to the great commission that Jesus has given us to go to all nations? Not just to the United States of America, God cares about America, but he cares about the whole world, God cares what's going to happen in the election in 2 weeks, but God cares supremely about the lost who have never had a chance to even hear the name of Jesus. He cares about those people too. And he wants us to reach out to them. I'm really excited as I close out this message today to say that our church next year is planning on sending 1 and maybe 2 teams to a region of the world where there are unreached people groups. People who either have never heard of Jesus or what they know of Jesus has been skewed. It's been warped. It's been mutated. And we will have a chance to go on short-term trips and encourage them to follow Jesus. So I want you to pray about that. Pray for us. Pray, be willing to give. And maybe there's some of you that say, you know what? God is stirring my heart and I'd like to participate. We'd love for you to contact us and talk to us and we'll see what we can do. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you'll take this really simple and basic message and really shake us up today, challenge our hearts today. Lord, help us to hear your voice. Help us to hear what's important to you. How should we respond to your great commission?